Now we're going to focus on two other words at the beginning of Genesis 1. Tohu and Bohu, or without form and function. These words often, let's see actually how the NIV renders it here. The NIV has this in Genesis 1, 2, now the earth was formless and empty. Behind that term, formless and empty, is Tohu and Bohu. And we're going to find out that it doesn't really mean, we often think of this as being a reference to the physical shape of the earth, but it doesn't really mean that. Tohu. Wordexplained.com, a word study of Tohu wa Bohu. Wordexplained.com. Tohu. You will find in the italicized words below a definition of Tohu, followed by an alphabetized list of translations of Tohu from the new blah 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 blah. Okay. Tohu. From an unused word. Formlessness, confusion, unreality, emptiness, chaos, confusion, desolation, emptiness, empty space, formless, futile, futile things, meaningless, meaningless arguments, nothing, waste, and waste place. Genesis 1:2. The earth, NASB. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. Here's this guy's commentary. In the initial phase of day 1 during God's creation week, the earth is said to have been Tohu. This Hebrew word in this context has been translated in two categories of words. One, the first category of words all deals with the form, or the physical appearance of the earth. In other words, they assign a form, or more precisely, an absence of form to the earth in Genesis 1:2, as follows. Formless. And he gives a bunch of translations here that do that. Without form, or didn't have any shape, NIRV. 2. The second category of words deals with the function of the earth, or more precisely, its absence of function in Genesis 1:2. As follows. Barren, CEV, empty, NCV, waste, ASV, YLT, DT, void, DRA, or a soup of nothingness. Soup of nothingness, the Message. I have not read the vast majority of these translations. I don't even know what most of these acronyms stand for. What did the translators mean by the words formless or without form? If they meant merely that the earth, as a watery sphere, had no observable land features or things that appear on land, such as hills, mountains, rivers, or vegetation, their translation is at least admissible, if not optimal. The difficulty with the words formless or without form is that they at least suggest that the earth had no shape. In fact, the NIRV translation flatly states the earth didn't have any shape. Let's think that through a little bit. Did Moses really mean that the earth had no shape? Is there any intimation in the surrounding text that the earth was an amorphous blob? Was it not spherical? If it were a shapeless blob, would it not be because it had no gravity? What would have kept the blob from dispersing all over the heavens? To me, and this guy's speaking of this, a translation that focuses on form to the exclusion of function is problematic. In my own study of the word tohu in its various contexts, in a decided preponderance of the instances, the emphasis is not on form, but on function. Here too, in Genesis 1:2, in its broader context of Genesis 1 verses 1 through 1:1 through 2:3, the creation account, I believe the translation must carefully balance form and function. Whatever tohu means in Genesis 1:2, it means that the earth at that stage constituted an inhospitable, unsuitable environment in which physical life in any form could not exist, whether plant, animal, or human. It was non-organized and non-functional, as regards to its ultimate purpose, which was to be a suitable environment for man and animals. And naturally, it was also a void or empty Bohu of any living organisms, just as is our moon today. As Genesis 1:2 reveals, at this stage in day one of creation, the earth was a vast, unlit matrix of water and presumably soil and mineral. There's nothing. Okay, he's going to go on and talk about that. So let's go on to some of these examples that we're going to find of other instances of the word Tohu in the Old Testament, and see if we can find a pattern of them referring to a function of something rather than a form of something. We're going to be reading from the NASB versions. He has both the KJV and NASB versions quoted here, and we're going to be reading from the NASB versions. So anyway, Deuteronomy, example 2, Deuteronomy 32:10. He found him in a desert land, and in the howling waste, there's Tohu, of a wilderness. He encircled him. He cared for him. He guarded him as a pupil of his eye. Deuteronomy 32 is a didactic song of Moses, written as a witness against Israel's inevitable apostasy. Moses spoke of Yahweh's provision for Israel. Yahweh had found his people, Jacob, the sons of Israel, in a desert land, and in the howling waste of a wilderness. The word translated waste is the word Tohu. Waste here may refer both to the desert land of Egypt and also the desert experience of bondage and slavery in which the sons of Israel found themselves. Israel's slavery was not a judgment by God on the nation, but rather a painful crucible in which God melded the clan into a nation, separating them from their Egyptian hosts. In slavery, the people of Israel were unable to function as the nation God intended for them to be. 1 Samuel 12, verse 21. You must not turn aside, for then you would go after futile things, that's the Tohu, which cannot profit or deliver, because they are futile. First Samuel 12 constitutes Samuel's renewal of the kingdom of Saul over Israel at Gilgal. Samuel chided the people for rejecting Yahweh as their invisible king and requesting a visible human king instead. They had committed all this evil, yet still Yahweh would bless them if they served him with all their heart. They were not to turn aside from following Yahweh, for if they did, they would pursue futile things, Tohu, that could never profit or deliver, because they are futile. So turning aside from Yahweh by serving other gods and disobeying Yahweh's commands could be classified as futile or non-productive, because disobedience would inevitably lead to God's cursing and judgment. So Tohu in this context means useless, futile, and counterproductive. Isaiah 29, verse 21. Who cause a person to be indicted by a word, and ensnare him who adjudicates at the gate, and defraud the one in the right with meaningless arguments. People who are described as ruthless, the scorners, and all who are intent on evil will be cut off, as said in Isaiah 29, verse 20. They are further described as performing the actions that we just read in this verse, 29, verse 21. They sound like crooked lawyers or evil people who employ crooked lawyers to defraud their victims with meaningless arguments. So here, ba tohu means with meaninglessness. Isaiah 40:17. All the nations are as nothing before him. They are regarded by him as less than nothing and meaningless. Isaiah 40 features the mighty power of sovereign Yahweh as being able to comfort and to restore gloriously the people of Israel and the city of Jerusalem, despite the repeated ravages of the surrounding hostile nations. Appropriately, in Isaiah 40:17, Yahweh regards all the world's nations who have been Israel's enemies as nothing, less than nothing, and meaningless, Tohu. As far as God is concerned, he will stop the onslaught of the nations against his people, and so they will be an immobilized non-factor. The nations are of no account in Yahweh's sight and against Israel, and ultimately they cannot possibly succeed in deterring his program for his people. Here, Tohu means meaningless or of no account. Isaiah 40, verse 23. He it is who reduces rulers to nothing, who makes the judges of the earth meaningless. Just as the nations of the earth are non-functional and non-organized and opposing God in his efforts to restore his people Israel, just so he reduces potentates to nothingness and renders judges of the earth as meaningless or non-functional, Tohu, in their opposition to God and his plans of salvation for his people Israel, and indeed for all who wait upon Yahweh. Isaiah 41 verse 29. Behold, all of them are false. Their works are worthless. Their molten images are wind and emptiness. Tohu. Isaiah 41 demonstrates Yahweh's omniscient sovereignty in comparison to idols. Unlike Yahweh himself, who through the prophet Isaiah predicted the Persian king Cyrus as Israel's savior at least 120 years before his appearance, the Gentiles have no counselor who can predict the future. All the nation's counselors are false, and the nation's works are worthless, and their molten images are wind and emptiness, Tohu, meaning they are devoid of accomplishment and purpose. Isaiah 44 verse 9. Those who fashion a graven image are all of them futile, Tohu, and their precious things are of no profit. Even their own witnesses fail to see or know, that they will be put to shame. Isaiah 44, 9-20 is a scathing essay on the utter absurdity of constructing and worshipping idols. The section begins with a threefold charge. All who fashion a graven image are futile, Tohu. 2, their precious things are of no profit. 3, since their own witnesses fail to see or know the truth, the result of this folly is that the makers and worshippers of the graven image will be put to shame. So Tohu here is defined as that which is futile, because it brings no benefit, but only shame. It is futile, worthless, and thus shameful to build one's own God. Here's a big one. Isaiah 45, verse 18. For thus says the Lord who created the heavens, He is the God who formed the earth and made it. He established it and did not create it as a waste place, Tohu, but formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord, and there is none else. Isaiah 45:18 is a superb commentary on Genesis 1:2 in relation to the rest of God's creative activity in Genesis. Many foundational creation terms appear here. Bara, which is the create, that's the verb create. Heavens, Shamayim, earth, Eretz, formed, Yatsar, made, Asa, and waste place, Tohu. The most fascinating aspect of this commentary upon Genesis 1:2 is this. It helps us understand the meaning of the word Tohu, translated in Genesis 1:2 as formless, and here in Isaiah 45:18 as waste place. Far from denying that the earth as God created on day one was Tohu, God tells us that God did not create the earth to be Tohu, but rather He created it to be inhabited. So when Moses wrote in Genesis 1:2 the earth was Tohu, he did not mean that it was chaotic, evil, coordinate with sin and judgment, and in need of redemption. He merely meant that it was not yet a suitable environment in which humans might live. So an appropriate translation of Tohu in both Genesis 1:2 and Isaiah 45:18 is non-functional, or perhaps pre-functional. It was at that point not suitable for habitation, which was God's ultimate purpose for the earth. God would incrementally make the earth suitable for human habitation during the remainder of day one and the remaining 6 days of creation. Isaiah 45 verse 9, next verse. I had not spoken in secret in some dark land. I did not say to the offspring of Jacob, seek me in a waste place, Tohu. I, the Lord, speak righteousness, declaring things that are upright. In the very next verse, Yahweh applies His purpose in creating the earth, to be inhabited to the nation of Israel. Unlike the obscure and secret communications of the priests of false gods, Yahweh has communicated with the people of Israel openly and forthrightly things that are true. Yahweh did not ask Israel to seek Him in Tohu, that is, in a meaningless, non-productive exercise in futility. No, when Jacob's descendants worship the one true God, they are participating in genuine worship and in a relationship of eternal significance and value, for their worship of Yahweh was based on righteousness and uprightness. Here, the translation of the King James Version, in vain, is preferable to that of the new NASB, a waste place. Okay, let's see here. Any more of these I really need to do? I think we've kind of made the point. Actually, there's one more. Here's. I'm not reading every example he's included, by the way. Here's another example from Jeremiah 4:23. I looked on the earth, and behold, it was formless and void, and to the heavens, and they had no light. Jeremiah was predicting that the judgment from Babylon was coming upon Judah. The judgment was so severe the entire land of Israel would be devastated. And be devastated and thus non-functional, Tohu, and in many places empty of people, which is Bohu. So Jeremiah compared the non-functionality and emptiness of the earth with the non-functionality and emptiness of the earth on day one of creation. Tohu, conclusion. Brown Driver Briggs, Hebrew and English lexicon lists the following meanings of the noun tohu: formlessness, confusion, unreality, emptiness. Then it adds primary meaning difficult to seize. This is certainly true, as is evidenced by the chart. Blah 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 blah. Most Bible versions employ a translation of the word form, translating tohu either formless or without form. The translations formless and without form tend to leave the impression that the earth in Genesis 1:2 was shapeless. I do not believe that's what Moses meant. Instead, I have chosen the word unformed and have added 4 qualifying statements as to what unformed does not mean and what it does mean. We're going to read what it does mean. We're going to skip down to what it does mean. His fourth statement. Unformed does mean the earth was not yet in its final form. The best biblical commentary on Tohu in Genesis 1:2 is to be found in Isaiah 45:18, which tells us that the God did not create the earth to be Tohu, but rather to be inhabited. So when Moses wrote in Genesis 1:2 the earth was Tohu, he merely meant that it was not yet a suitable environment in which human and animals might live. It was unsuitable because it was dark and aqueous, because there was no atmosphere, there was no dry land, there was no vegetation, and there were no celestial bodies up in the heavens. In fact, there is a sense in which it can be said that the words unsuitable or pre-functional are appropriate translations of Tohu in Genesis 1:2. By way of illustration, it could be said that today's moon is Tohu, although not nearly to the degree the earth was in Genesis 1:2. So it was non-functional. It was not able to do what it was meant to do. Let's go ahead and look at Bohu. Bohu is actually fairly easy. It just means void or empty. But Bohu, from an unused word, emptiness, void. There are 3 instances of Bohu in the Hebrew text. Every time Bohu appears, Tohu also appears in the same verse. Obviously, the 2 are linked. In the following representations, the Hebrew text... Okay, blah, 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 blah. Okay, we already read 2 of the 3. Actually, we already read all 3 of them. Well, 2 of the 3, excuse me. Genesis 1:2 and Jeremiah 4:23. Genesis 1:2. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. Jeremiah 4:23. I looked at the earth, and it was formless and empty, and at the heavens, and their light was gone. Isaiah 34:11. But pelican and hedgehog will possess it, an owl and a raven will dwell in it, and he will stretch over it the line of desolation and the plumb line of emptiness. Bohu, conclusion. The term Bohu only occurs 3 times in Scripture. 3 times. Each time it does so is in tandem with Tohu. The Jeremiah passage harkens back to the language of creation. Brown Driver Briggs, Hebrew and English lexicon, lists a 1-word definition for Bohu, emptiness, and gives no etymology. 4 representative translations. Someone states, by the way, the etymology for both Tohu and Bohu has been lost. Thorpe's and translations translate Bohu as void 6 times and as some variation of empty or emptiness 5 times. In English today, empty is a synonym for void. Since void, with the meaning of emptiness, is not a commonly used word, I will use the noun emptiness to translate the noun Bohu. Conclusion in regards to the dual use of Tohu and Bohu. We have already known that Tohu and Bohu always appear in the same connection. In 2 of these instances, Jeremiah 1:2 and Genesis 1:2 and Jeremiah 4:23, are to be paired off. In Genesis 1:2, Moses declared the earth was formless and void, Tohu and Bohu. Jeremiah stated that as he looked at the earth, it had primeval conditions, formless and void, the heavens had no light. We don't need to read the rest of that, honestly. The point that I'm making here is that Tohu and Bohu, Bohu basically means empty or void, and Tohu, we often think of it in terms of it talking about the material state of the universe, the earth, but it really doesn't, and it refers more to the concept of the earth not being functional yet. And this actually factors into the rest of the creation narrative, because what God is doing in the rest of the week of creation, as he's setting up all these things, is he is making the earth functional. He is making the earth operate according to how he wants it to operate. And so when he looks at it and says that it's very good at the end of creation, or he looks at each individual piece and says that it's good during creation, the idea being communicated here is that it's doing what it's supposed to do. It's doing what it's intended to do. Things are functioning as they're intended to function. So at the beginning of creation, before all that, it was Tohu, Bohu. It was non-functional or pre-functional and empty. It was not yet ready to be inhabited. It was not yet a functional system. And you also have to remember that when Moses is writing Genesis, he and the Israelites have already set up the tabernacle. If you really want to understand why Genesis 1 is written the way it is, you have to go to the part of actually I'm drawing a blank on the exact chapter where it is, but the section where God actually gives them the step-by-step process they're to follow day by day, 7 days, to set up or dedicate their tabernacle. Because that is a pattern that it's the same pattern. The 7 days of creation and the 7 days of dedication of the tabernacle are following the same pattern, a week-long dedication period, at the end of which the temple is functional. The dwelling place of God is functional. The earth was that temple, the dwelling place of God in Genesis 1. The tabernacle will be that in Moses' day. So when Moses is writing Genesis 1, they've already set the tabernacle, God's already dwelling in it. It's already functional, and he's using that as a pattern. They've already seen, they're already familiar with it. It's already happened. The tabernacle is with them as they're traveling around. And so he is drawing on their actual experiences and memories of that event to illustrate his pattern of God setting up the earth to be a functional resting place for him at the end of creation, when he declares it very good. It's doing what it's supposed to do. There is more to it than that, but I need to make a new video because this is getting on pretty long now.